Welcome to the Inner Entrepreneur podcast. Today I sit down with Sean Hoff, founder of Moniker. Sean started right at the bottom, waiting tables, leading bike tours in Barcelona, but he had an idea and he took that idea and built it into the multi-million euro business that Moniker is today. We get to learn about Sean's journey, about the obstacles, the resilience, the passions, the setbacks, the hard knocks, and ultimately how we built Moniker into the company it is today. I certainly enjoyed this interview. I learned a lot, and I think you will too. So let's jump on it.
Well, thanks for having me, Paul. So my name is, as you mentioned, I'm Sean Hulliff. I'm from Toronto, Canada. Our company is called Moniker. What we do is we plan corporate retreats, offsites, and incentives for our clients basically around the world. We work with a lot of companies that are either trying to celebrate or like reward an achievement. So those would be our incentive trips, or the other category would be like what we call retreats and offsites, where typically it's a tech company and they're taking their entire team somewhere in the globe to just spend some time doing a little bit of work, some team building, and then just hanging out and, getting everybody together because they either are a remote company or they just don't have, or they have people spread out all over. So that's what we do. It's a very fun business. It also has its ups and downs, as you can imagine. The years of 2020 to 2022 were a little bit of a road bump in our industry, but yeah, I've been doing it for about 11 years.
So where did the entrepreneurial journey start for you? I mean, did you grow up wanting to run your own business, or did you stumble into being a business owner? What was the road you took?
Yeah. So I am the son of two parents who were entrepreneurs. I don't think it really kind of popped into my head when I was going to university. I was pretty much convinced that I was going to follow a very typical path. I studied business in undergraduate university. I was expecting that I would take a job somewhere in a bank or an accounting company, who knows? But what I did find was that every summer during university, when my friends were applying for jobs in downtown Toronto, at the big companies, I was applying for these student working abroad programs. And so actually one of my first jobs in summers was in Dublin.
Oh
I
wow!
moved, I moved to Dublin for a summer. I worked at a bar in Temple Bar. That would have been 2004. Um,
Temple Bar was probably a nice place to visit at that stage.
Back then it was
Yeah,
charming. It was
I
quiet.
don't know if you've been back since.
Yeah, I was training up to work as a busboy at one of the bars. And on my first shift, I had a bit of a disagreement with my manager, and he was like, "You have to carry a tray with three fingers," and I'm just not that balanced. And so
What difference it made? I don't
I
know.
know, but one of my first shifts, I was carrying a tray of about 12 pints of Guinness to a table, and sure enough, I stumbled and fell. And there was a cascade of Guinness onto the table, and I got pretty much let go that same day. And he says to me, "You know what, Sean? This might not be your speed, but my sister-in-law runs a hotel out in Galway. That might be more your speed." So I hopped on a bus, and 2 days later, I was working at a much quieter hotel bar as a bartender at the Harbour Hotel in Galway, Ireland. So I have a big history
Well,
with it.
Galway is a beautiful city, but it sounds to me like your first introduction to Ireland was committing a cardinal sin, because if you drop 12 pints of Guinness, so I just make sure that's not public knowledge next time you come through passport
Yeah, a
control
hundred
in
percent.
Dublin. I'm, I'm not so sure I'm not so sure they let you in. Temple Bar, I
Yeah.
don't know if you're aware, has now become maybe over the past 10 to 15 years or so, um, a kind of a go-to event for all the stag and hen parties. I don't know if
Yes.
that's so
We
it's
didn't have
become
that back then.
yeah, but it didn't. I mean, it's in a great spot in the center of the city, and if someone's visiting Ireland, it's great to visit during the day. But at night, certainly, it's not somewhere. It's not surrounded by. It's a crazy place. But Galway is a beautiful city. So, how long did you spend in Ireland?
So it was every summer that I was doing these little kind
Wow.
of working abroad things, and I enjoyed it because it gave me a lot of exposure just to like talking to people every single day from all parts of the world, as opposed
Yeah.
to like sitting in a cubicle at a bank in Canada. And I think that's where kind of the gears started turning, that there was a much bigger, broader world out there than what most people going to school. You have this very narrow vision that like, this is kind of the path, that one of maybe two paths that you can follow. And so when I graduated from university, at that point, I kind of had caught the travel bug, and I was convinced that I wanted to figure out a way that I could take a business degree, but somehow apply it and work in the travel industry. And through just like a very coincidental family connection, one of my father's friends was working at a large like online travel agency, in Canada. And I pitched them this plan of like, how come you're not targeting the student market? We're talking like grad trips and, end of year celebrations and spring break and reading week and things like that. And he was like, of course we are. Look, here's the flights, here's the hotels. I said, yeah, but it's a different market. You need to like actually market it differently. You can't just show up
Directly
and
to that audience. Yeah.
exactly package it together, saying, this is what this university is
And you
doing.
would come up with this just from your own experience of
Exactly.
traveling as
So,
a student.
yep. So I wrote this business plan about how they could essentially change the way that they approach the student market,
Wow.
and it would give them a leg up on some competitors who weren't. And my intention was just to like basically sell the playbook and then walk away. And so I could take the money and go traveling again.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, you know what? Sounds good. You're hired. I was caught off guard, and I ended up working with them for about a year and a half, kind of starting to build this out for them. They got acquired by Thomas Cook Travel, and
Oh, yeah,
Thomas
no.
Cook wasn't interested in all these peripheral businesses that they were
Yeah.
doing. They only wanted their core online booking engine. And so I was basically told, look, thank you for your services, but they don't want to do this anymore. I said, okay, let's play. So I took everything was already kind of in place. I had already made all these bookings on behalf of the company that I was working for. I just need somebody to foot the bill at this point. So I took the whole binder and I went to one of their competitors and I said, I'm ready to go. I just need people to sign checks.
Yeah.
And they, at that point, this other competitor, was only approaching high school students. And I guess, targeting the college and university age was on their radar, but probably a few years down the road for them. But when the opportunity of somebody who came in ready to go, had everything lined up, was there, it was a no-brainer for them. So I ended up working with this other company for another about a year and a half. And I had the unique position of being able to essentially like spearhead a new business line, but with the safety and security and guidance of a larger organization.
Yeah.
So that's where the entrepreneurial bug for me started. I had so much fun kind of building a brand and having to solve all these challenges, and I had to hire people and I had to figure out what our marketing strategy was going to be and how are we going to price this. And after about, a year and a half, I was just getting tired of working with students and everything that comes with them. And that's when I decided to leave. And so it was a very amicable parting. In fact, the president of that company ended up becoming my first investor when I started Moniker. But I just basically said, look, it's been a nice ride. I think what this has done for me is, if anything, shown me that I definitely do want to start my own business. And so I went away and I applied for business school and I got in. And over the course of that, like most students in an MBA program, you kind of get brainwashed into thinking, okay, you've got to work at an investment bank or you've got to work at a McKinsey or BCG type company. And those are
They're
the
not
only
really setting you up to become a small business, a small
No,
business owner.
not at all. It's like they almost want
Which is
to
bizarre,
erase.
really, because like 95% of businesses are small businesses, and
Yeah,
massive amount of employment is small businesses, but they're not setting it. They're prepping people to go into the huge companies.
there is a bit of a surprising brainwashing that goes on because like
Yeah.
I know I speak for myself and a few of the other students. When we arrived, we were all there because we wanted to learn how to operate and run a business.
Yeah.
And then kind of halfway through the programs, we were all worried about where we were interviewing and what companies were hiring.
Yeah.
And so it happened. I call it a weird twist of fate or not, but I graduated from business school in the summer of 2008, which was not a good time to be graduating in the business world looking for a job in finance.
Yeah.
And so I became a bicycle tour guide in the city of Barcelona, just to pass time thinking that this big financial crisis, which back then was not called a crisis, it was just called a blip on the radar. It was just, it'll pass over. And so I started doing these bicycle tours and I just fell in love with it. Like I was hosting people again from around the world. And I was actually making pretty good money off tips.
A great city again, Barcelona.
I was in the best shape of my life. I had a great tan. I was loving life. And, eventually the season ended and my mother talked some sense into me and said, look, Sean, I think it's time you actually get a real job. You just graduated. Like, let's take advantage of and apply this degree you just got. And so I ended up coming back to Canada and I worked in a bank for about 4 or 5 years. And while I was there, I became part of a group that offered something called the President's Club trip. So each year, and this is quite common in a lot of financial companies, is they'll essentially have like a program or a trip where the top 50, top 60, however might be, performers are invited on some very nice glamour. And as I was probably 26 or 27 years old. I was like a deer in headlights. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen.
It
It
wasn't
kind of,
Barcelona on a push bike.
no, it wasn't. And I think it's all of a sudden, like the light bulb went off in my head where it's like, here's somebody, whoever's operating this trip for the bank, is they're running a business, but they're also
Yeah.
planning travel and they're very heavily involved in travel. And so I started becoming more and more like observant of how the inner workings of the company that the bank had hired to plan worked. And I started becoming more involved on our side in the planning committee. So I could kind of, figure out the nuts and bolts of how this was coming together. And then ironically, the last year that I was at the bank was, the trip was slated to go to Barcelona. And so here was this destination that I had spent 2 years of my life in. I knew it inside out. And I just started kind of like definitely overstepping my boundaries with the agency that would hired and kind of, yeah, how do we do that? I think I would do
Yeah.
this and this. And
You
when the
probably knew
trip,
Barcelona better than they did.
I 100% did. And by the time the trip came around and, I didn't agree with a lot of the things they had planned, they had us on double-decker tour buses with earphones, or we were going to restaurants with laminated menus with 6, 7 languages. It just is not how I would present the city of
No.
Barcelona to a group of people.
And not how you would represent the company that's paying for it either.
Exactly. And so I kind of just started suggesting to some of my colleagues on the trip, I was like, look, I'll take you guys on a bike tour. I'll show you the Barcelona that I know. And what was supposed to be an offhand comment to like 5, 6 friends turned into 30 people coming on this bike tour. And I rang up my old boss and I said, could I rent 30 bikes from you? He said, sure, as long as they're going to pay for them. And it just kind of snowballed from there. And by the end of the trip, I got called in by the managing director, and he chewed my ear out, basically saying, this is actually a problem because we paid for all these things and nobody's showing up because they were out gallivanting around the city with you.
Having fun, enjoying
Yeah.
themselves.
And that's when I was like, well, look, like if this agency that you hired and paid some sum of money for isn't doing a good job of it, and I'm doing this for free and I enjoy it, like maybe there's something there for me. So I think I came back and I knew at that point, like I wasn't long to continue working there. I had already started kind of falling out of love with what we were doing. Finance just wasn't for me. And I started kind of asking around and talking to people and networking about like, what would it be to get into this world? It's called the MICE segment of the travel industry: meetings, incentives, conferences, and events. It has its own little acronym. And so I talked to a whole bunch of people and they all had different recommendations. A lot of them thought I was crazy, but I was like, I'm going to leave the bank and start this company. That was 11 years ago. And here we are now, 11 years later, and we have 20 employees across Canada. We're one of the bigger ones in Canada. And it's been an absolute journey. I loved it. But I think it all came back to this tying in this thing where I've always knew that I was like very tied and drawn and passionate about like somehow traveling and meeting people and hosting and hospitality. I love working in hotels. I love working in bars and restaurants. And then how could I turn that into a business? And just realizing that every time I had a job at like a normal company, like at a bank or an accounting firm or something like that, I just like, it was just soul sucking for me. So I knew I was never going to fit into that world. And that's kind of the journey.
Wow. A couple things strike me about it. Is one of the things that strikes me about it is that to some degree, it's been a messy journey. A bit of this, a bit of that. And at the time, it may have probably felt to you or maybe your parents like, "Oh, what's he doing? Like this, like he's playing a bit of this, riding bikes in Barcelona." Yeah. But somehow, when you look back, whatever it is, years later, you go, it all rolled together and it all ultimately took you to where you are today.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's entrepreneurial journey is ever a
No.
simple linear line. I mean, I think everybody has a few detours, a few setbacks. And I think that's part of the journey, right? Like you learn from those detours. You also build resilience. You build perseverance from the mistakes or from the hurdles. And I think it all contributes towards where you're supposed to be or where you're supposed to end up. It usually isn't how you pictured it as, or the perfect end to what you thought you would end up doing. So yeah, I think it's kind of part of the interesting path that we all take.
Well, the interesting thing that I find about talking to entrepreneurs is was a couple of things you learn. And one of the things you learn is that for people who are not entrepreneurs and maybe look at people who have successful businesses, etc., all the nice stuff that goes if your business is successful, you can look at it and think they've been lucky. It's all gone smoothly for them. They've all just landed there, and then you get to speak to. And I mean, I've been in lots of groups and forums and masterminds, and I have never met an entrepreneur doesn't who it hasn't been a very messy journey and who doesn't have war stories to tell you about the journey. And that's the thing, you realize that it's, I suppose, one of the things that makes a successful entrepreneur, it seems, is the ability to weather those storms,
Yeah.
the ability to face those things and then have the resilience to just keep twisting and turning and find a way out. But the other thing that struck me is that when you're in a situation, you were seeing the opportunity. Like someone else was obviously happy with how these trips were run, but you were seeing the opportunity because it just wasn't being done up to the standard that you would do it.
Yeah. And I think even in the first years, like I left a pretty comfortable job. And by all
Yeah.
accounts, like everybody else
How was that at the time? How did that feel at the time leaving that job?
it was, it was part like, okay, this is probably a stupid decision of me. And everybody I kind of floated my idea out to, just to like friends, family, they all kind of seemed to agree with that. Like, wait, hang on, you want to start?
Everyone
Oh,
agreed you were being a complete idiot.
yeah, you want to start this company that plans
You have a
trips,
great
like
job in a bank, and what's your problem?
exactly.
A big salary, whatever. Like this makes
And I think part of like being comfortable to take that kind of step is that, like, if you truly actually believe in what you're doing, like the naysayers and all the haters, like it doesn't matter. Like I knew what they were saying made perfect sense. Like it seems like do this on the side, do this at night, or
yeah, yeah.
don't risk the safety that you have now.
That is good advice. That is good.
But you're not going to be able to really take the full plunge unless you commit yourself and like jump into the deep end. And I knew that. And so like, if I tried to do this on the side, I never would give it 100% of my attention,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't be forced to just make it work. Like if I faced struggles or anything, I'd be like, you know what, it's
What
not
age?
working out
What
as
age were you at
planned.
that point?
This would have been 2013. So I would have been 29 years old.
It's kind of a good age to do it because you have some degree of experience. You've done school, you've done college, you have a number of years of work, which you probably are to a point where you have a family, a big more, you
That
got all
I
this.
didn't.
Well,
Yeah.
this is the
I
point. All these responsibilities. It probably, if you're going to jump, it's a good time to jump.
It was. And then that was part of the decision, right? Like it was kind of like I found myself in this unique little crossroads in my life where I wasn't happy with what I was doing. I was excited about this next opportunity. If it didn't work out, what was the worst that could happen? Like I didn't
Yeah.
have a mortgage. I didn't have a family to support, and I had supportive people around me that
Yeah.
if all else failed, I'm pretty sure I could have found another job. It's not hard to find a job when you're in your late 20s or early 30s. And I also still had like the credentials and the resume to say, maybe I go back to working at another bank.
Yeah.
Like, if that was like the worst case scenario. And there was definitely times like in the first 2, 3 years, like I think the first year we lost a lot of money. The second year we maybe broke even, but lost a little bit of money. And at that point I was like, okay, well, maybe this lark wasn't as well thought out as I believe, but I started to see this momentum. And I think even then, like I at least really enjoyed what I was doing. Like I looked forward to work every day. I woke up every morning and I was excited to like check my email and see what was going to happen. And I hadn't felt that in 4 or 5 years working at the previous company. And, and that for me was worth it. It's like, you know what, I might never find success and financial like freedom from this, but for at least the time being, I really enjoy this and I'm learning a ton. I was learning a ton about this travel industry. I was learning a ton about trying to build a company and manage people and all that stuff. So at the very least, like that's what I was getting out of it. And then I think it was about year 3 is like, oh, wow. Like we finished up our bookkeeping for the year. And I was like, we actually turned a profit. And it was like a very modest profit, but it was a sign that there was progress there. And then all of a sudden it started to grow. And I think at that point we had a team of 3 or 4 people. And then I started to see like, maybe this thing does have potential. And I think the big lesson I learned from there is that I know there's this statistic out there and I'm going to misquote it, but it's like 90% of new businesses fail within the first 2 years or first 3 years, and 3 out of 5 entrepreneurs never see year 3. And I can see why, because like everything was telling me this isn't working the way you thought. It's time to go back to the security or stability of something more regular. But I just wasn't ready to give up on that idea yet. And I saw enough hints that it could work, or enough like kind of whiffs of success, that I was like, I'm going to give it another year. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, I think it's pretty textbook that it takes about 3 years. And I've done a number of podcasts on this. It's something like 95% of businesses don't survive, just don't survive the first couple of years.
Yeah.
And of the ones that survive, less than so it's half of all, half of a percent of all businesses will last 10 years and have revenues in excess of 10 million. So, but I think a big part of it is just that a lot of businesses don't survive, but just that ability to stick it out. Because how can you get to 2 years, not be making money, and still think this makes sense? Because you're beginning to doubt yourself, and everyone you know is beginning to tell you this is a crazy idea.
Yeah, I think a big thing about that is it's not necessarily that they had bad ideas or that their businesses were poorly thought out. I think a lot of it just becomes like self-doubt.
I that's the point I'm making. Yeah,
Yeah, if it's
because
you're
if
2
you had to
years
stop for
in,
2.5 years, you'd have a different story about how this business didn't work out.
100%, 100%.
Yeah,
And I'm obviously I'm very glad I did.
of course.
I
Yeah,
think as well that one of the I'm a big believer in mentorship and taking on mentees, but also like I have mentors and a lot of them have given me great advice. But one of the best pieces of advice that I give a mentee that I'm working with right now is always just like, you're not going to become a millionaire overnight or next year or in the next 3 years. They're going to become a millionaire in 10 years. So
yeah.
stop worrying about, like everything on TikTok and Instagram now is about becoming a get rich quick scheme or something like that. That's not how the biggest businesses are built. I mean, like you can look at the most famous entrepreneurs nowadays, which are, your Elon Musks or your Jeff Bezos and stuff. People know enough about their story that it took like 5, 10 years grinding away from a garage or from a parent's like spare room or something on a business before it finally took off. But 95% of the entrepreneurs I know, like they've been grinding away at their company for 10, 15, 20 years, and they're living well and they have a good sized business, but they're not billionaires. They're millionaires, and they're still grinding away because they truly believe in what they're doing, and they get it. And maybe that path is going to take longer than they thought. But if you really care about what you're doing, either the mission of the company or what you're trying to solve, or it's just something you're genuinely passionate about, I don't think money becomes as much of a focus. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, like I speak to, where we do affiliations with different colleges in Toronto. And when I speak to younger kids and we present to their classes, like this fixation on like, I just want to get rich. Okay, well, that's nice, but like, what do you want to do with it? What do you want to do with your life? How do you want to give back? Like, what is it that you want to contribute to the world? They don't know. They just want to get rich. And I think when you chase entrepreneurialism for the objective of getting rich, you're probably going to fail, because in the first 2, 3 years, you're going to realize very quickly that most entrepreneurs struggle very, very hard in the first 2, 3 years. And so if that was your only motivation, your only like influencing factor, then you're probably going to quit. But if you're more tied into like the purpose side of it, and it doesn't matter if you're struggling, it doesn't matter if you're not going to be able to do certain things because you can't afford it, because you still believe deeply in what you're trying to build, those are the entrepreneurs that I think have the much higher probability of actually seeing it to 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, as you said, and being the last one standing in that room. And I think that's something that with entrepreneurs and everybody who I've met, like where Paul, you and I are in this organization called EO. The ones that I know who are the most successful now, like they have stories upon stories about how much they struggled in the first 5 years, how much sacrifice them and their partners had to make, their marriages had to suffer through, and now they're comfortable. But it's 15 years later, and it didn't come overnight. It didn't come even in 5 years. Like it took a long time for them to get there. But it's the perseverance side of it.
I think if you look at the statistics, as we said, 95% of businesses fail. I think something like, I'm not sure, it's 1% of the world's population, maybe it's 2% of the world's population are millionaires. So if your goal is to be in the top 2% in the world, isn't it obvious to you that that's extremely difficult to do? It's like having a goal to win at the Olympics. I mean, and that kind of amazes me that there's nothing else people would head into thinking it was easy. If you took up golf tomorrow, you wouldn't expect that you would be a pro in 2 years' time. I mean, everyone accepts that these things take a long period of time, but yet people have this notion that somehow you can make money very, very quickly. And we both mix with a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm not saying there aren't people who've made money overnight. I've never met anyone who has actually done it. I've only met people who have worked for years, often decades, and then the wealth is the reward of the work. But one thing that struck me very, very early on is you said you absolutely love the work. I think that's key because if you choose to do something just for the money, it's very difficult in year three. I mean, it was the end of year three before you realize I'm starting to make some money here. And you said it was modest at that stage. Very difficult to stick at something for 3 years, not making money, unless you go, yeah, but I'm fulfilled. I'm enjoying this. Like if I can make a living doing this, it's a great way to live. And that gives you such an edge over someone going, I'm gonna do this job because it'll pay me very well, but I hate it. You'll be miserable. I don't know how people stick at that.
One of the questions that bothers me the most when either I'm chatting with like other people who started a business or even just like people who are aspiring entrepreneurs is what's your exit strategy? And it's like, well, sorry, like, what do you mean? And it's like, well, what's your exit? Are you going to IPO? Are you going to PE? Or blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, my exit strategy is to live a long, fulfilling life where our business keeps growing. It's not about trying to sell the business. It's not about trying to flip the business. Too many people are looking at this like, I'm going to commit blood, sweat, and tears for the next 5 years and hopefully, cash out. And it's like, I would love to see some sort of study about the entrepreneurs that get into it for that 5 year cash out. That's their exit versus the entrepreneurs that get into it thinking, I don't know, maybe 20 years down the road, I'll pass it on to somebody or sell the business to my employees. Like the people who have the really long term, no exit strategy, what the difference is there between success rate. Cause I never approach it from that perspective. And most of the people who I've met who have these businesses 20 years on, it's like, they didn't have an exit. They just wanted to do what they loved and get paid well to do it. And if they found that magic kind of crossroads that allows them to do that, like, why would you leave? If you sell your business, what are you going to do? Like, what becomes your purpose? Why do you wake up every single morning? I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs who are very successful and they sold their business early, like in their 40s, 50s, or even in their early 60s. And all of a sudden, yeah, okay, you've got this bag of money in your hand, but what are you going to do each day that drives you? And when you wake up and you don't have people to talk to for the social side of it, or you don't have purpose to get up and try to win a deal or to, restructure something that make it more smooth or efficient, like you lose a lot of what drives you as a person. And I've seen people go into decline because of it. And
Yeah.
that's, I think,
Yeah.
what separates a true entrepreneur from somebody who's just trying to get rich.
I agree with you pretty much entirely. And the only except I would put on is I was 59 about a couple of weeks ago. So as you get probably your mid late 50s ish, and when you've been in something for maybe 3 decades, you do begin to look at what's the exit strategy. And I had about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe in around that period of time, we had an offer for someone who wanted to acquire our business. And it was at a very interesting time because I have a home in Spain. I was just about to head over there for a couple of months, and this big multinational wanted to acquire us. My wife was already over in Spain, so when I came home, I'd known to have a conversation with about which was good. About 3 or 4 days later, I arrived to her home in Spain, and my wife had a friend there with her, so I still couldn't have the conversation with my wife and go, "Look, I've been made this offer for the business." So the friend stayed for a few more days, and I like to cycle, and I was out a couple of mornings out just riding around in the sunshine in Spain, and riding around thinking, what am I going to do here? And the thought that came to me was that I've spent so many decades building this business that I'm really proud of. And what it felt to me like was deciding to build a beautiful home and spending years building foundations and finally having this beautiful home that really, really works very, very well, and then selling it. And why would you do that? So I remember riding in the hills of Spain and going, I'm going to live in it for a while longer. But the thing about it is, at that stage, what you need to do and what I need to do is go, well, I'm going to live in it a while longer, but I'm maybe at an age where an exit is a possibility. So at that stage, I created a structure with my management team I said, well, if I'm getting to an age where I might want to exit the business, but I don't want to exit, I need to come up with a good plan of how the business can remain without me being into the degree that I was. And that's what I did. And that works very well. So you're considerably younger than I am. So that may be ahead of you, but I agree entirely. You know, if a business is working well and you're building it, you got to do something, and why not just keep building it? And ultimately you're going to increase the value of it
Yes.
when the time comes, you do want to exit. So 10 years on, Moniker's doing very, very well, and it's clear you're still as passionate about the whole service you provide as you were when you started off.
Yeah. I think as well, like most entrepreneurs I've met, they tend to have this internal itch to constantly be
Yeah,
building something, a new challenge or starting something new. Like most of the people I know from my EO chapter in Toronto, like some of them have 2, 3 businesses
yeah,
simultaneously. I can't even imagine that, right? Like
yeah.
the amount of time and energy it takes to build one is
And the
for me.
complexity, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. For me, it's like, I want my focus to be on building one to be the best and the biggest it can be,
yeah,
let alone try to split that attention or just
yeah,
quadruple my hours to do it 2 or 3 times. But I think there's this common trait where even if you're starting to think about sunsetting your current one, like you're already starting to think about what's next, and it's quite common. So maybe that's where I am in a few more years. But I think for now, I'm still very, very focused on like what we're trying to build here, and I'm very proud of like the team that we've got in place. And I would love to learn more about how you structured your deal. I had a question for you, Paul, is when did you feel, or like what were the signs telling you that maybe it is time to start thinking about walking away?
So we've two businesses. We're mostly based in Ireland, and we do some business around Europe and the UK. And we largely do that business because we have some specific clients who have reach into those areas, so as opposed to chasing those areas. But we had on a particular technology looked at developing our business wider around Europe. And we pursued that. And as it happened, I pursued it for a couple of years and decided then it wasn't going the way I wanted it. And then you've got to make some sort of a strategic change in your business. I just began to look at the business, and I began to look at the team around me. And I realized at that stage that for me to move the business on to what I felt was the next level, that there were a number of key people on my management team that weren't up to what I felt was the next stage of the business. And I also realized that probably I had now been running the business for close on 20 years. I need to upgrade my management team, but also maybe there's people now who have skills that I don't have. And
Yeah.
I honestly looked at the fact that the business had prospered and thrived a lot down to me and a lot of the good work I'd done and what I brought to the business. But then I thought, but okay, but the next decade of the business might need something different. And I began to actually realize this, and maybe you've never witnessed this, but I began to realize that some of the problems we had in the business, that how I operate was creating those problems. And so I looked at my management team and I said, I actually need to remove 2 or 3 of those people, which I did. And I brought in much higher caliber people. And then I had a cold, hard look at myself. I said, Paul, I think I need to remove you also. I think possibly you're part of the problem here. But in thinking about that, I realized I also brought something that was really, really important to the business. And so I kind of segmented and said, Paul, you bring some really, really good things to the business and they're here. But everything else, you need to no longer get involved and you need to have better people doing that. And so, look, I mean, that's kind of a synopsis. So it's kind of hard to look in the mirror and realize, well, I'm the entrepreneur. This is my business, but maybe I'm no longer the best person. So when I look at the team I have in place now that took me a number of years to build, every time I meet with those people and they tell me what they're doing and their idea, and I just go, these people are better than I am. And I say that with humility and joy because at the end of the day, they're doing a wonderful job at my business. But also, it means that you have people who are maybe a decade younger than me who are reaching a point in their life where they're going, well, we now have a lot of influence and control over this business, and they can do something great for themselves, which does something great for the business, which kicks back to me as well. So I think part of it is the willingness to continually learn and look at yourself and be honest about what you bring to the business and what's needed in the business. And I think the biggest restriction to most businesses growing or moving on to that next level is people thinking that they are the business and the business needs to depend on them. And of course, that's not the case. But it's why I called the show The Inner Entrepreneur, because I think the biggest growth in business for me was when I was willing to look inside. Business skills are everywhere to be learned, but it's when you're willing to look inside and learn, that's really when you begin to grow. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think it does. I mean, I think that's self-awareness and being able to put your own ego or your own ambitions aside for the greater good, I think is not something that many people are prepared to do early on in their career. I think it is a skill you kind of learn and develop over time, and being able to recognize that you've raised a great team and you've coached them into a place where you feel confident handing a baby or something you built over to them. That takes a lot of humility. And I don't think that many people learn that until sometimes it's either too late, like their management team gets tired of waiting and then they start to leave, or it's too late, as in they believed that they were the best person to lead the company for longer than they should, and the businesses actually start to go into decline because it would have benefited from new perspectives or new blood. So kudos to you for being able to recognize that in yourself, and then as well in the management team that you were running.
Thank you. I mean, it's interesting because it's kind of bringing back to where the conversation we started before we switched on the record button, and that conversation was about culture. And the interesting thing to me is that people often ask me, how can you step back from your business and how can you have other people run it? If you don't get the culture right, it's entirely impossible. It's just impossible to do that. But it was really interesting because that you said how important culture is in your business, because you will never get to that place unless you have a culture of trust with your team, where they know Sean really wants the best for us, because then you're setting up a different environment.
Yep. I am fully behind now. I think one of the best lines I've ever heard was, a culture reflects leadership. A lot of companies can put things up on the wall and
Rubbish.
and preach something. It's at the end of the day, it's like the same way as raising children. Like, your children are a reflection of how you parent. Well, your culture in an organization is how you lead. You can say a million things, but if you look at your own culture and you're like, this is not working, then there's nowhere to look or point the finger than at yourself.
Is that something you stumbled across, or how did you learn that piece of wisdom?
I would say for the first 4 years of the business, I was so focused on just like, I was working my ass off, and the people around me that weren't. And I was like, I don't understand it. How come everybody else doesn't seem to be as like laser focused on this and willing to sacrifice as I am? And I realized a big part of it was because they didn't have as much at stake as I am. They wouldn't participate in the reward, and they also didn't have as much to lose if it didn't work out. And so my philosophy kind of switched towards that. And it was like, what can I do to get everybody else on board, to get everybody else like in the same boat, rowing in the same direction? And that a big part of that was for me shifting towards a very, very transparent mentality. Like, we share our financials with the company. If people, like, if we are facing decisions that we don't know the answer to, we'll openly say, like, here's a situation that we're facing. Like, I don't, like, option A is this, and I'm not sure how it will work out. Here are the risks. Here's option B. I don't know, but I think we're going to go with option A. Does anybody disagree? I'd love to hear your opinion. And I think getting people to have a stake in that, and asking people for their input on those kind of decisions, gives them that sense of buy-in and involvement, where we've just seen so much more engagement with everybody on the team, like right down to the lowest rung, because that they feel that they are part of what we're building. They're not just a cog in a bigger machine. So that's been one of my biggest, like, I think I've definitely benefited and changes like a leader in the style of leadership that I have over the last decade. But the biggest thing is really like, you're never going to get far. What's the phrase? It's, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go long, you have to get everybody. Yeah, you need to get the whole team on board. And I think that's where I shift. It was, I
think when you look back over an entrepreneurial journey, you find that it's people who, wherever you are, it's people who've gotten you there. When I heard you right away talking about the importance of culture, it certainly strikes me that you're so well on the right road, because I think there's so few people that really, really understand that. You're ahead of the game, and also it's how you get great people to work for you. So I think the takeaways from this conversation, I think, is for the young entrepreneur. Firstly, I would say to do something that you're passionate about, doing because it's going to be a long, hard road. And if you're looking for a short, quick road, try something else. It's going to be a long, hard road. And if you know that in advance, if it's going to take me 3 to 5 years, then don't be beating yourself up after 2 years. But it's going to really help that you're passionate about it. But I think if you recognize, oh, these people are successful, and they go, yeah, it takes 3 to 5 years to get going, then you go, well, I'm not a failure, I'm just on the road. And the second takeaway, I think, is for the more experienced people who have established businesses, is when your business is established and that a lot of the hard work is done, what's going to make a big difference is the culture you establish. So they're the things that stand out with me from the conversation.
One of my favorite quotes is just stay humble and hustle hard. Like, just, I think for me,
Oh, yeah.
the biggest lesson I've learned is it is a very long journey, and the road to success is not golden paved, is filled with hurdles, obstacles, ups and downs. And the ones who have the perseverance, but are guided by purpose, which allows them to persevere and be resilient when they face those obstacles, those are the ones who usually make it the most. So don't get discouraged, as you said, if things don't work out exactly as you wanted in the first few years.
Because they definitely won't.
Keep your head down and just do what you can.
That's great advice. Well, Sean, it's been a very enjoyable conversation. I've learned a lot, and I really have enjoyed the chat. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Paul. I appreciate it.